Okay, this is lecture number 16. It's about, in the last lecture, we talked about John Locke and human rights and property rights and minimal government. The purpose of government is simply to protect you if somebody tries to violate your rights to life, liberty, health, and possessions. Everything else you just rugged individualism. You just work hard, you exploit the land, you create wealth, and then you barter what you've made with other people, and nobody has more than they need, and there's no money, so that there's plenty of land for everybody. And you can kick the Native Americans off the land because they're not giving it value. And then the purpose of government is to protect your rights. All right. Now we want to take that model of rights and connect it with Adam Smith. So Adam Smith was also in Britain during the Industrial Revolution. He wrote the book, The Wealth of Nations, and the economic system had been run by the privileged class, the nobility, and they controlled regulations always to protect themselves. So there were extreme protections against imports. And Adam Smith just argues that that's a dysfunctional system and you should have a free market. Producers should be able to trade with other countries freely, right? And so Adam Smith is often used to support the system that we have right now, international global capitalism. But as you will see, there's no way that he would agree with what we have. Again, his model is very simple, and it's before money stuck to money, and the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. So Adam Smith was also very concerned not to allow the rich to oppress the poor on a free market system. So I'll talk about that. And then I'll talk about applications today. In particular, I have a number of editorials from right after the financial collapse of the US economy in 2007. And I would like students to bring their own examples. Again, like the lecture on Kant, it's going to be a shorter lecture, maybe half an hour max, and then you have more time to think about your own examples. So I would like your posts to have your own examples. All right, so let's see. Here is okay. Let me get this. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, so let's first do Adam Smith and what he was concerned about. This is not the version of Adam Smith that is popular by what we call the neoliberals. So there are economic leaders in our country who think minimal government. They go back to Locke. They say government's purpose is just military and police. But you should argue that today we need education in order to be middle class. We need healthcare, we need transportation, unlike it originally, way back in 1688 or 1776. And so we need to expand the resources. We need to tax the rich and provide high quality public education, public health care, so that people can get middle class jobs. John Locke thought all you do is give people a homestead, let them work, and barter, and they'll be fine. And they'll all be approximately the same um, level of wealth, because nobody can hoard. All right. So what was going on in Britain that drove Adam Smith to write The Wealth of Nations? Um, Adam Smith also wrote a book, The Theory of the Sentiments, where he emphasized moral education, especially training children to be beneficent, which means generous, which he got, straight out of Aristotle or common sense. But he would agree completely with Aristotle that you have to encourage, socially condition as much as possible people to be generous, to understand that they depend on each other, and not to let wealth get concentrated. So, what does Adam Smith say? So, before the Industrial Revolution, the feudalism, um, there were the aristocrat that owned a whole fiefdom, and then the serfs each had their own section of the farmland to farm, and everybody was doing approximately the same jobs. But in the Industrial Revolution, people moved from the country to the city, and in the factories, there was a huge division of labor. And Adam Smith argues in favor of that because instead of someone who makes horseshoes and the nails to pound the horseshoes in, right? On the old way, when a certain number of people were blacksmiths and they all made them one by one, they could maybe make 100 in a day, probably more like 50. But if you have a factory and there's a division of labor so that each person on the factory line does a very brief task, it goes much faster. You can make 10 times more. So Adam Smith is arguing in favor of that. The workers have dexterity. In other words, they're perfectly capable of doing that very small job. Whereas when you have a blacksmith, he has to do all these different jobs. It saves time, and machines replace manual labor. So there's a lot of specialization, there's expertise. It increases productivity, which increases the wealth for everyone. So the expression is all boats shall rise, right? Everybody's going to benefit from the industrial age, from moving into factories. Everybody will have a lot more material goods than they did when they were farmers, serfs on the farm. Okay, so what's the motivation to work? Well, to barter, all right? Not, again, he is in favor of bartering rather than creating a huge monetary system with money. Why are they motivated? Well, self-interest. They want to flourish. So economic self-interest, right? They're rational. They calculate the most efficient means to their own self-interest. And then he says people are naturally more equal than unequal. Um, all right, this is very important because in his time, there was a big argument that people are unequal. That's why the privileged class gets their privilege, because they're by nature better than other people. And Adam Smith, no, that's all socially constructed. So just like John Locke, this is part of the Enlightenment. Freedom and equality are major pillars, ideological pillars, ideas. So Adam Smith says the inequality actually comes from a division of labor based on habit, custom, education, and the desire to survive and thrive. So the privileged class is unequal. There's an unequal division of labor, and people just get habituated to that. They get used to it. But we should change things, right? We should provide opportunities for people, everybody, to have a chance to work and improve their lot in life. So differences in talents are brought into the marketplace and bought and sold according to the needs and interests of the people. So now we moved from a disposition to barter to a marketplace and buying and selling either your goods or else your services. So he has a very basic view of the natural and the market prices of commodities. So the natural rates of wages and profits and the natural price of commodities is whatever the particular circumstances demand to maintain the system. So that includes some profit for the owner, but the supply should be the same as the demand. So if the supply exceeds the demand, if there's too much and the wages, there's too much, there's too many workers, and the profits are too big and it exceeds demand, then the price has to go down. And if the supply is below the demand, right? There's more demand for the commodity, then the price goes up. And then Adam Smith says that there is this tendency for the prices to vary according to the demand. Prices move toward the natural price. All right, is that the way the market actually works? Was that true then? Is that true now? So again, he goes back to the original state of nature, just like Locke. The laborer enjoyed the whole product of his labor. So I work the land, I make 10 pounds of corn, I barter it for whatever else I want. And it's balanced. You have the whole product of your labor. You have all 10 pounds of corn and you decide what to barter it for, and you get sort of the equivalent of what you need. When you're bartering, what you get from the other person is approximately the same value as what you give. So the ownership, the trouble is, once we went from that original state of nature, just like Locke, right? The original state of nature, ownership of land. Somebody owns it and somebody works on it. All right, now the laborer is at a disadvantage. He can demand the products, the value of the products of his work. And so the owners start to accumulate capital. Okay. The laborers, for example, before the harvest, the laborers have to borrow money for the seeds, right? They're trying to survive, and they have eaten up all the food from the previous year or all the value, given it away, sold it. So now they have to borrow money from the owner and work and then pay it back. But the owner, they have to pay with interest. So the owner profits from this process because he can. The worker doesn't have any choice because he doesn't have a lot of options. So there gets to be this tension between the worker and the owner. And the worker wants to maximize money, and the owner wants to maximize profit. So that is the world after it comes out of the state of nature, and now you've got owners and workers. Okay. So Adam Smith, talks about capitalism. He knows money. His understanding of the free market includes money. Um, then he points out the owners or the masters have complete advantage in the disputes between the owners and workers. The owners can hold out during a strike where the workers starve. So if the workers want to strike and refuse to work unless they get better payment, the owners have a lot of money and a lot of accumulated capital, and they'll just sit on it, and the workers are going to run out of money and they're going to start starving. And so they give in. So even if strikes were legal, they always lose. The workers always lose because of the disparity of wealth. That's why, you know, disparity of wealth is a terrible problem. Another thing that happens is owners sometimes make secret agreements to control the wages. Um, they Owners have unwritten agreement not to raise the wages to keep the workers alive, just enough to keep workers alive and healthy enough to work. So in theory, right, an owner can say, okay, just like John Locke, free, equal, consenting adults. When you get married, you're free, equal, consenting adult. When you join a church, free, equal, consenting parishioner. When you sign a contract to work, you're all free, equal, um, free to sign the contract, free to write the contract. So the owner is free to write whatever contract he wants, and then the employer is free to sign it or not, right? And the trouble is the owners get together and they figure out what nobody should undercut anybody. So the workers, they can say to the workers, here, you want to sign this? You have to work 18 hours a day in a coal mine, 6 days a week, and you get $10, right? They could do anything, but they want to pay them enough to keep them alive and to keep them relatively healthy, but not any more than that. And then they communicate with each other about how much they're paying so that when they tell the worker, you don't like my contract, go get another job. Well, it's not going to be a better job because they've um, convened together to monopolize, right? To control the market. Um, All right. And Adam Smith was aware of this and he was very much against it. And that's another reason he wrote his theory of the sentiments. You've got to raise kids, especially the ones who become owners, to be generous, not to want to treat people this way, even if they might be able to. Um, so the workers did try to form unions and refuse to work. It didn't work. Um, so the only way the wages could go up is if the demand for the products goes up. This occurs most when the market increases. The markets increase when revenue and capital increase, and the revenue and capital increase when the national wealth increases, and therefore the wages go up when national wealth goes up. Well, the other thing that happens is that international, right? You start trading with other countries. That's another way to increase the overall national wealth. And then that's the only way your wages could go up is start to open up the markets. But still, the owners are still at an incredible advantage over the workers. Um, so what's his conclusion? The free marketplace, what is it really about? Well, Locke's free, equal, rational individuals who act according to the most efficient means to their own self-interest will produce the most and best goods at the lowest prices. So Locke's social contract goes from being applied to politics. It's in your interest, your self-interest to join civil society, create a standing up body of laws that will punish offenders, anybody who violates your rights, is now being applied to economics. Okay, it's the same model. It's in your interest to join into economic contracts. So that's the invisible hand, right? If everybody just does this, the markets will grow sort of automatically. The government should not get involved. It doesn't know how to interfere. It will interfere for the wrong reason and the wrong way. So politicians have political motives for interfering in the economic system. So then you have the corruption of the corporate owners paying the politicians to make laws that favor them or not to make laws so that they can get what they want. And so, according to whatever business person pays off a politician or pays for their political campaign, that they will get the specific law passed to favor their specific business. So that's how equality turns into inequality in the marketplace. Okay. Yeah, oh dear. All right. Oops. Now I have to get the next one. The next one is John Locke and Adam Smith. All right. Nope, that's not it. Yeah. Oh, let's see. Okay, here we go. All right. So let's just go through the line of reasoning once again. I have repeated this quite a bit, but it's, you know, it takes a while to see how, if you narrow it down to the most simple kind of understanding, I think a lot of Americans still think like this, or at least part of it, and it has a lot of impact. And so you have to look at the flaws that were always there for one thing, but are really evident at this point in history because of the changes. So Locke on natural rights, there's three branches of governments, balance of power. People have a right to representation by elected officials. They have a right to have their rights protected. The rulers are not above the law. They have a right to replace unjust rulers, either by election or revolution. Um, Natural rights are applied to social life, free speech, free press, free association. They're applied to economic life. Locke, barter system only, keep money out of it. Adam Smith, the original state of things, the whole product belongs to the laborer, but we don't live in the original state, the corporate state. The landlord demands rent. He lends money to workers until the harvest comes in. Then he demands a profit. He charges interest. The government doesn't make adequate laws to protect workers because the legislators get campaign contributions. They get bribed. If the workers strike, the owners can starve them out. The owners secretly agree to keep wages low. If workers get violent, it's used against them. All these things still happen, incidentally, and it's kind of magnified. So economic association is the Achilles heel of the system. It's really the source. We have huge economic inequality in our country, but we also have huge inequality in respect to having any of our rights, right? So unequal ability if to defend yourself in court or to bring a case to be prosecuted. Why? Because if you're rich, you can pay. Some lawyers are really, really good at getting you off or at getting whoever you want to get prosecuted. And they're really good at it, so they charge a lot of money. And so if you're rich, you get a really good lawyer. If you're poor or middle class, you do have a right to a lawyer, but but the state has to give you a list of lawyers, but oh, they're not good lawyers, or they're paid a lot less, so they're less good. In Texas, they were there were articles about lawyers in Texas. Some of them on the list that the poor people could choose from. Some of them had been debarred. One of them slept through the trial, even though it was a capital crime where the defendant, if he lost, he would lose his life. He'd get killed. So the states, some of them pay very little attention, and a poor person or even middle-class person gets a really lousy lawyer. So officially they have a right to a lawyer and they get something, but it's not the same at all. So there's an unequal ability to start a magazine or a newspaper or publishing house or any kind of communication, right? Those with money dominate information, they dominate public debate, and they dominate public opinion. Now, this was before the internet, but still, the rich can saturate the internet, especially right before an election. So, and then there still is a whole lot of problem with misinformation, disinformation, fake news. But a lot of that, again, is algorithms at this point. There's a lot of really good, high quality information or ways to get informed. You can open up a YouTube or a podcast by a real expert on a subject and really learn a lot. But the trouble is there's a lot more of bad stuff and algorithms that if you like it, you'll keep getting directed toward that same type of thinker or the same thinker. So if there's an unequal ability for legislators to protect the rights of the poor because the rich will influence political campaigns and they will only support the politicians who agree to protect their interests. Okay, the right to education. Do we have a right to education? Or is it just one more way that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer? The rich benefit from an uneducated underclass because then their children don't have to compete for the best jobs. When the rich stop benefiting from the uneducated class, they'll support public education, but only enough to maintain their power and privilege. So supposedly we have public education in our country, but the quality of the public education as opposed to private education is immense. And then we have recently real estate taxes being local real estate taxes pay for the schools. And if you live in a suburb with very expensive houses, you will pay high real estate tax and get high quality public schools. And if you live in the city and you're renting and the housing is not worth much, there's not much tax money for schools, and then the schools will be bad. So there's an unequal right to education. So, and a lot of conservatives now are saying there isn't even a right to education. John Locke, Adam Smith would definitely want a middle class. They would not want what we have. So I think they would think there's a right to education, a right to health care, or is that just going to be a struggle? So the rich get whatever health care they want. But the poor need public care, but the rich doctors benefit from public health care. Other rich people don't, so it would only be partially supported. So there are neo-libertarians who want to cut all public health care, Medicare, Medicaid. People should just work harder, get a better job, and have their own healthcare fund. Um, the right to possessions. So if the rich have a right to keep their wealth and not be taxed, even when the entire system keeps wages much lower than the value of the product, right? Does everyone have a right to get paid according to whatever wage scale the free market decides, even when the free market is controlled by the rich? So these are questions for you to ask because it's a huge issue in our country. Um, okay. So what's another? So now I have some articles that give you specific examples of how this is playing out. So here we go. This one is just outlines of articles that I read around the time of the collapse in 2007. So let them eat microchips is quoting from when the Queen of France, the peasants were protesting they wanted bread. They were starving. And the Queen was so naive, she just said, well, let them eat cake. If they don't have bread, they can eat their cake. They don't have food. Like she didn't figure that out. And so saying let them eat microchips is equivalent to that the libertarians say, well, let them get a better job and let them have keep an education fund for their kids and let them keep a healthcare fund for their health. And they don't make enough money to do that. And they just don't understand that the way the system works, it's impossible for people to have housing, food, to pay for education, healthcare. I mean, there's just no way. Um, so the philosophy is the person who's earning twice as much as you is probably twice as good as you are. Well, not if money sticks to money. And then the guys at the top can really not not create a lot of value in their work, but they still get paid a lot. Locke is the labor theory of value. You work hard, you become prosperous. Government is to protect your property. You deserve the fruit of your labor, but no money, barter system. In 2000, there was a struggle in the Republican Party. The Republican Party has traditionally supported business, whereas the Democrats are associated with social programs. But the stereotype is that the Republicans are very fiscally responsible. They don't like deficits, whereas the Democrats are giving all these social programs and blowing up the deficit. This is not true, okay? Ever since Ronald Reagan, which is 45 years, um, Ronald Reagan started cutting taxes. When you cut taxes, the deficit blows up. And so the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. But it's John Locke, right? You're applying the old John Locke, minimal government. But the society's changed, and we still have these old ideologies. Okay, so another article is our system depends on people being rational and calculating the most efficient means to their own economic self-interest. Now, I question that because it's not people who actually get married, that's not in their economic self-interest. If you have kids, it's not in your economic self-interest. And so on this rational calculation, you're rational if you're single, no kids, work every day, work 18-hour days, everything just to calculate the most efficient means to your own wealth, increased wealth. Well, that's not your, that's not rational. Having kids and families shouldn't be considered irrational. It should be just humane. It's humane. Whereas this view of rational is inhumane. It's not human. It's not the way we live. It's not the way we should live. But anyway, so what's going on is that, hey, people don't always act according to their self-interest. When they're making decisions, they perceive a situation, the options. This is a old Aristotelian thing. If you remember, deliberation. What do I have to decide on? What are the options? What's the best choice and why, right? So, but public policy analysts have assumed that number three is the most important, right? Calculating, being rational. People calculate how to maximize self-interest. Well, in the economic collapse, Alan Greenspan was in charge of the Federal Reserve, and the price of housing was really going up, but he didn't uh, raise the interest rate, so it'd be more expensive to buy houses and fewer houses, because he thought that the banks would um, calculate appropriately, right? I shouldn't give a loan to these people because they can't afford this house. But that's not what the banks did. They had these credit swap um, new product that was unregulated, and people would buy houses they could not afford, and the banks cashed in. And then when it all collapsed, they got bailed out by the government because the argument was if all these people, if the banks don't get payments, mortgage payments, they're going to go bankrupt. And then all the other people whose jobs depend on them are going to lose their jobs, and they'll just be the spiral downward. Um, but Alan Greenspan should never have trusted the banks to be rational in that sense. Um, let's see. So again, David Brooks comes in there. Perception is meaning making, right? It's conscious and unconscious. The gigantic banks appeared to be stable, but actually they were really fragile. And the trouble is our brains were evolved to perceive a much simpler world, and we tend to perceive data that conforms to our prejudices and our experiences. So we've never experienced the collapse of the big banks. We tended to trust banks. Uh, we over we tend to overvalue recent events rather than the bigger picture. We talked about that. We tend to desire an oversimplified explanation of cause, and lots of times dumb luck. We get dumb luck and we say it's, well, that's because we were calculating. And so it's tragic, right? Human beings are deluded about how rational they are. I mean, my big thing is it's very inhumane to even want to be rational in that sense. Now, in general, buying a house is rational because you build equity on the house. And so I think that's all they meant, is that in this particular case, the decision to buy a house and then the banker's decision to write a loan for people, that was supposed to be calculated in this strictly money-based model. But there were lots of ways that the banks were deluded and people were misinformed about the nature of these loans. And okay, so David Brooks concludes that the markets are not perfectly efficient. People are not good guardians of their self-interest. Government might be useful to intervene. Government tends to be even worse, but the financial meltdown is not just financial, it's cultural. So, yeah, the bankers were just arrogant and greedy, and they were irresponsible in their distribution of loans. And then nobody got arrested for this. And they should have, because it's harmful to the society, obviously. But our system is way too much controlled by the wealthy. John Locke and Adam Smith would be appalled, right? Okay, an economy of faith and trust. This person knows about John Locke, Newtonian physics, just as I said, the world as a machine, completely ordered. But quantum physics, the world is much more dynamic. And so Friedhof Capra, the systems view, is based on quantum physics, not Newtonian physics, the machine. Classical economics, culture is an ordered clock, a machine. People calculate the most efficient means to their self-interest. This is John Locke. Invisible hand, you tell people to seek their self-interest and the system will work to everyone's benefit. But in the US, there's a lot of stupidity and incompetence. We're self-destructive, we're impulsive. And I think we're also deluded, we're arrogant. The bankers thought they were more powerful than they were. They thought they were more stable than they were. The classical model of reason is that reason is a horse, the rider on a horse who's in control and guides the horse. Reason is objective, it can see universal truths, and over patterns, like the pattern of greed, the pattern of arrogance, the pattern of not, if you want a free society, don't let the rich get richer. But the new model of reason is that, okay, the emotions, the instincts are driven by unconscious, external, all sorts of drives and distraction, and context matters. We don't perceive circumstances objectively. Sometimes it's better just to react, but sometimes calm deliberation. People, and mostly people want relationships more than money. Hence, they want to fit in with the crowd. They have a herd instinct, but they want families, they want homes, and so they will be blind, right, to the financial issues. But just to set up a society, even assuming people behave just on calculation of economic self-interest, is just inhumane, and it isn't the way people function. Both Democrats and Republicans have an over rationalistic view of human nature. For the Republicans, it's cost-benefit calculation. They want private Social Security accounts. They want to stop the forced Social Security taxes. They want to stop Medicare, Medicaid, and have people set up your own account. They want to stop public education, but, you know, they don't want to raise wages to the point where people actually could set those up. There's no way on the minimum wage even, which again, you could say is an intrusion on the economy. Even on the minimum wage, there is no way people can get these things. The Democrats are also, and we'll see this when we discuss Bentham and Mill, they think that they can predict the greatest good for the greatest number, because that's their principle, that they make laws on the basis of maximizing overall happiness for everyone, not just protecting your rights. But again, you can put laws in place, you can try to create rewards and punishments so that people will behave in a way that's in their interest, but they don't always behave that way. So, and further, an economy is part of the spirit of a people and the spirit of a time. So the recession is partly mental. When people suddenly become afraid, they just stop spending money. And it's just an emotional reaction, and then the economy also collapses. So to set up false hopes. Sure, you can have a big house like that on your salary to create these delusions, or excess fears is going to create a lot of instability, and then people will look to a powerful leader to fix it for them, and they'll lose their free and open society. Um, So here's another article. Social Security is actually fine. It's not in trouble. But the real reason for the attack is ideological. It's a set of ideas that redistribution of wealth is wrong in principle. And that's where that goes back to Locke's principles. But Locke would not agree because it's leading to this huge economic inequality all over the world. Okay, and then this one other article is actually U.S. industries want regulations. So the Bush administration rejected regulations. The Trump administration rejected even more and created even more debt. So Bush cut taxes and blew up our deficit. And Trump cut taxes and reduced regulations and blew up our deficit even more. And the rich got richer and richer. Now, Clinton and Obama also, and even Carter, made some moves that again made the rich richer. Okay, so Bush rejected regulations, didn't pass laws, or they didn't enforce them. There was no money for the enforcement agencies. Um, and then the Bush put people in charge of, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency. He would put somebody in charge who spent their whole career violating environmental laws and getting sued by the Environmental Protection. So of course, when they're in charge, they're not going to let that agency let the people do any work of enforcing laws. That was true. Trump did that too. He appointed a number of people whose whole careers were, were based on just destroying or breaking the very laws that these enforcement agencies exist to uphold. Now the industries want regulation because uh, okay, there are imports that don't meet the standards. They're getting competition from imports. So if you're free to not make decent products, you don't have all those rules, then China can will imp sell you stuff that the Americans want because it's a better product. Um, the libertarians tend to not want tariffs, so they're pretty annoyed with Trump when he puts on tariffs because they think a free market, everybody gets the best thing at the lowest price. Um, Also, when you cut all the regulations, people would get hurt and sue the companies, and the companies would lose because people could prove that they had material, it was a cost. If they suffered, and they have the evidence to show that. But some states have stronger laws, but companies say we need regulations because if I just voluntarily put on some regulations so I don't get sued, my competitor will not put them on and sell at a cheaper price. And then, it's just a crapshoot whether anyone's going to get sued, whether anybody gets hurt. And so, of course, you can't assume you would get sued. You have to just keep making the product. But if you made regulations, everybody would have to behave themselves because the government would come after you if you didn't and fine you, right? Well, then you can put someone in charge that will not send out regulators, so you won't get fined. You can they really need laws about how to produce our food, or else people get sick and then the company gets sued. Um, that in general, the Democrats want stronger laws, and the Republicans want weaker laws, but it had gone too far. There were not enough regulations. Under Bush, it was even more true under Trump. Um, this patchwork of state regulations. So some states will have more regulation, but that's more difficult for businesses because how can a business operate if it's already in like 10 states and each state you have different laws? So you have to run your business differently. That's way more expensive and confusing and more likely to lead to lawsuits than if you just have a federal law. Okay. And even when the companies came out saying they wanted some regulations, the Bush administration fought regulations for ideological reasons, right? It's just a matter of principle. And uh, it's not working in our day and age. It's just, oh gosh. All right, so here's another article. There's a couple more that are pretty interesting. Here's one. This one is about taking responsibility for the commons. Okay, so this came 2009, not long after the financial collapse. And he's saying our economy is like a sport utility vehicle that has thrown a rod, right? Um, the drivers bypassed inspections, exceeded speed limits, ignored the oil leaks and the warning lights, right? So there were a whole lot of warning signals that people were saying the economy is overheated. Cost of housing is way too high. What's wrong? What's going on? Um, okay, so what really matters is the culture in general, right? Okay, the systems. So rational consumers says, have it easy. We pay our money, we make our choices. But there's a difference between you and a consumer and you as a citizen. So this goes back to John Locke, whereas you have to learn how to think as a citizen. So when the lecture on Locke, when you're a member of a certain religious denomination, you can think people are going to hell if they don't go to church, whatever you want to think. But you can't think that when you're acting as a citizen. You can't discriminate. You have to deliberate based on our common humanity and our common ability to come to reasonable decisions about how to run our secular life, including our economy. So you have to learn to think like a citizen when you're thinking about how the laws should structure our economy, okay? We have to think about the consequences of our actions for other people. We can argue, we can negotiate, we can compromise, right? But we don't consume in a vacuum. We have a culture. We have to take responsibility for governing the commons. Things that can be easily privatized cannot be privatized. Clean air. We have a responsibility to collectively have clean air laws, clean water laws, a stable climate. Oh gosh, insurance for people so they don't end up like there's a climate catastrophe like hurricanes. There's more and more hurricanes, floods, you name it. And insurance companies are going bankrupt. But what are we going to do, right? We still don't have environmental regulations, so there will be more and more houses getting blown apart. And then the insurance companies are starting to refuse to insure houses that are like on the Florida coast, or it's incredibly expensive. So we need to, create laws that will stabilize the climate so that everybody can prosper. We have to have access. People have to have access to education so we can develop knowledge and technology. We have to trust and care for one another. That's Aristotle's trust and goodwill. So the generosity here would be taxing and having taxes, having institutions, having services, having laws that provide basic needs for everybody. So, after in 2009, there was this accelerated attention toward the commons. Al Gore had a nice movie, An Inconvenient Truth, which is about climate change. He knew about it 70 years ago. Um, Newsweek says we're all socialists now. We all want to bail out the banks. Yeah, it's just that the way capitalism works in our country, the banks get bailed out by the government. So they have socialism. The rich have socialism and the poor have capitalism. They have to pay the bill and they don't get any of the benefits from it. But the theory was that they would be able to keep their jobs because if the banks collapse, everybody loses. That was the theory. But um, it was pretty outrageous the way it went over. Um, so actually, some of the really anti-government politicians are suggesting maybe we should nationalize the banks. You don't even have private banks. You don't have banks getting personal profits from their loans. If the government did it, it would be done in the interest of everyone. Well, I think they just said that. They were not serious. They wanted to look good. They wanted their party not to look so rotten, because there's no way we're anywhere near that. We're at a much more extreme. We need a communal landscape. We need to think like citizens. Okay. The most inconvenient truth is not global warming, but the revelation that economic institutions can create incentives to pollute. Investor fraud is a form of pollution. Consider the root of socialism. Its opposite is not capitalism, it's individualism, right? And that goes back to John Locke, that rugged individualism. Markets can be engines of economic development, but they're only a portion of our economic system. The financial wealth of the world is small compared to the value of ecological services produced by assets like our oceans. And we're killing our oceans. It's going to be bad if we don't have the algae, the kind of food fish eat. The oceans are getting warmer. We could kill off the plankton, and then all these animals will die off, and our food source will go. Um, okay. So we work for a wage, right? Calculating our interest, but we devote about as much time overall to work on behalf of our families and communities. So social wealth matters. And I have emphasized that throughout my discussion of Locke, is that we're our humanity, a high quality of life includes relationships. And this calculation, this rational calculator is an inhumane creature. And hopefully nobody's like that. Capitalism is not coming to an end, but the traditional definition as a system that works when everybody pursues their individual self-interest has broken down, right? So again, the idea is the Enlightenment models are not working. We need a systems model, right? Systems is accounts for social systems, which I'll show you in a minute. Let's see. So there's the commons, and then I think this is the last one. This one is about babies. And there a book that says actually we are social creatures by nature. This is what Aristotle says. We are social and political by nature. We need each other in order to survive, much less to live a flourishing life, which is why generosity is so important. Generosity is not this individual who's giving charity or something because they worked hard and they made extra money and now their preachers telling them they're going to go to hell unless they give some of these ne'er-do-wells who don't make as much because they're lazy some charity. No, no, that's just not true. So Aristotle will say, we are social and political by nature. We need each other. So generosity is just recognizing the truth that we actually depend on each other. Um, so then this researcher says that human babies is draw a lot of attention. Everybody looks at a baby and they forget whatever differences they have, and they just love that baby. It's just true. Take a walk around a lake or something, and somebody's got a kid in a stroller, and everybody's asking about their baby, blah, blah, right? But that's a good thing. And so she's saying that the extraordinary social skills of an infant. Like the infant knows how to attract attention and how to, make everybody feel, uh, get their attention, right? It's a survival instinct. I know that 2-year-olds are get at their age where they separate their own identity from their parents and they say no, and they're very annoying, but they're also really cute. They're unbelievably cute right at that age when you want to kill them. Okay. Um, so they can get attention and attention from a lot of other people. And then people work together. They have empathy. They understand. I know that one of the reasons that I was attracted to Aristotle, but it was so intuitively obvious to me that we're social and political by nature, is that I had a baby when I was 21 and I was still an undergraduate. I was a senior in college, but I was, obsessed about making sure that everything I did, why would I go to grad school? Why do I want to be a philosopher? Is to make the world better for my children, right? So now you're obsessed with getting along with people or creating a good society because this is the one your babies are subject to. They're going to have to grow up in. Um, and human babies are outrageously dependent on their elders for such a long time. Why? Because our heads get too big because we have big brains. So our heads get too big, and a lot of mothers die in childbirth anyway, or they used to, but they have to get born way before they're ready to get born because why are our brains so big? Because over time, we evolve to understand patterns, and our greatest survival skill is our knowledge and our ability to communicate that knowledge to other members of our species and about predators and preys, all that, everything. So that's why our brains kept getting bigger. But then we had to get born earlier and earlier. And so it takes a lot of time. Um, So we are cooperative breeders where there's an extended family to take care of your children. Extended families are natural. Aristotle says that. Um, uh, there's, okay, so we have temperament. We have this temperament to get along, to cooperate. That's the opposite of John Locke's rugged individualism. Um, so we tend to empathize. And again, the Greek culture is all trying to cultivate empathy. Um, okay. We need to trust other people to take care of our babies. Yeah, right, in order to survive. Um, okay. Human mothers allow other people to hold their kids because they're exhausted, for one thing. Um, so, okay. So there is this other popular dogma among evolutionary scholars that humans evolved this sociality and cooperation only in order to better compete with other people. And she said, no, right? It isn't for the sake of competition. Uh, our, our social nature is part of why we create art, why we explore the sciences, why we create high quality social networks. That's how we're fully human. Um, okay. All right. So we became emotionally modern long before the human brain got big. Uh, cooperative breeding. Okay. Okay. So this is the conclusion that we are social by nature. And once again, the John Locke's model, but also Descartes and Kant, if you remember. They're just disembodied minds. Mr. Kant advocates in order to know how to act, you use your reason and you act on these absolute principles, never to treat another person as a means only. But that's different than bonding, right? It would never occur to you to treat them as a means because you have empathy, because you're human also. And so, yeah, Kant's view was not emotional. And then the Germans, of course, corrupted it. But that detachment from emotion, you remember he called it inclination. Boy, that is very inhumane. And then John Locke's view, he knew we had to have virtue ethics. We had to have Aristotle's virtues. We had to have Confucian. Our founders knew that, but that's not what they said. And it's not what's carried forward. Carried forward is inhumane. And then we have the economic collapse. But I won't say it's getting better. I think it's getting worse. Elon Musk is a rabid libertarian. He's even more anti-government than anybody so far. And right now, Donald Trump, it seems to be giving him a whole lot of power. Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, these people are those Kantian mathematical Cartesian types and creating a very inhumane system. So I don't think we learn much from the economic collapse, and I don't know where we're headed. We also did not learn that we should protect the environment if we don't want people to not be able to insure their house or have to pay thousands, $500 a month or something. It's just dysfunctional system because it's too individualistic and it's falling apart.